Mac guys here on Birds 365 Football Friday. Only 18 days till Eagles training camp opens up, and here's a guy who'll be there on the regular for NBC 10, working with and making sure John Clark's hair is completely in place, and if not, he can.
Got to be difficult, Rob.
Yeah, there's zero chance that's happening, but thank you, Jay. I appreciate it.
Feel free to smack him upside the head any chance you get. Rob
Yes,
Kuestner,
that I'll do. Yeah.
from NBC 10, good enough to jump on board with us. All right, Rob, you've been through this before, the wait before Eagles training camp. We do it to a lesser extent with the Phillies, and that's a little different because it's a countdown to Clearwater. You got to get up and get out of town to be able to go at the Phillies, get a season underway. Eagles, you just got to have a pass to get down to the NovaCare complex. How big is this upcoming season for the Eagles off a Super Bowl appearance this year? How much juice you're going to find in the NovaCare complex when you show up there in a couple of weeks?
So I would say that I've been around it for a few years and happen to recall the T.O. year and what that was like when the Eagles added T.O. in Lehigh when fans could come to training camp. You won't have the same feel in that regard because you don't have fans at the NovaCare every day. But I would tell you my best gauge of this would be over this past summer, Devontae Smith's celebrity softball game. Now, look, with all due respect to the guys and all their efforts swinging a bat, they're football players playing softball. Sold out crowd, not a seat to be had, 10,000 strong at Iron Pig Stadium, Coca-Cola Park. And to me, that's the best example I can give you of the excitement that surrounds the Eagles right now. I think we're going to see it, and I think it's going to be significant. I think fans are ready for it. Although I will say the Phillies getting hot certainly diverts attention for a little bit, but once the Eagles get back on the field, I think it's all attention on the Birds.
By the way, Rob, I think the Eagles like that when training camp starts. You know, the Phillies get a little bit hot and people start paying attention to them and maybe give the Eagles a little bit of a pass through the summer. And then obviously when the season starts, it's ramping up no matter what. But I think they like that, breathe a little bit because, I mean, how passionate the people are. And you and I were at Milton Williams and Zach McPherson's 7-on-7 tourney. By the way, I got to talk about that Roman Catholic kid with you.
Yeah.
Rob turned me on to him. But, these guys had a short off season, and Zach. I mean, Zach is ripped, for his and Milton for his position's in tremendous shape, and they're young guys. But man, that they played a month more than almost everybody else, and that kind of weighs on you, and you could feel it from those two guys. They're like, wow, we're almost ready to start up again. Really, really quick. Do you think that's going to have an impact on this team?
Well, it's funny we were talking about the Phillies. I don't think there's any question that it impacted the Phillies specifically in their starting pitching. The fact that their run went to a World Series and went an extra month. And look, I realize they're different sports, but to me, there has to be a little bit of carryover. And I think it's not the biggest challenge Nick Sirianni's ever faced. I think winning over the locker room his first year was the biggest challenge that he faced. But this one's significant. I mean, to get everybody back to the level that they're going to need to be to have the kind of effort, especially early in the season with a new offensive coordinator, new defensive coordinator, a lot of shuffling going on, especially on defense, as you guys have mentioned. I think it's a real challenge. So I do think there's going to be some carryover. I think training camp is a huge part of it. I will say this, though. The one thing about football, unlike the other sports, is that there's so much turnover. The new blood does tend to keep some of that from carrying over. If you really look at the Phillies, for the most part, same roster. Sixers, we're expecting largely, I mean, who knows on Harden, but it's largely the same roster. In football, there's so much roster churn that does help that, but it doesn't. And certainly having Jalen Hurts helps that, because that's the one thing about Jalen Hurts, and I think it's a big reason why he's the guy they've given everything to. But certainly his on the field play is part of it too. But he keeps guys in line and makes sure that the effort is where it needs to be. And if he doesn't see it, he calls it out from a player perspective, and I think that matters. But it's a factor. It's something I'll be watching in camp.
Rob, you mentioned the Eagle defense and the potential changes this year. Has to be because there's been a talent turnover. Free agents left, new guys were brought in, draft picks. How much will they step in and play year one? And the guy who will make those decisions is Sean Desai, the new defensive coordinator. We got one media session with Sean before they went away for the summer. And he won the session. He's a smart guy and handled it well and kind of sucked up to the fan base. And
he knows he was at Temple. He knows.
Yeah, he's smart.
He knows how to play the verbal game here in Philly. So we give him the tip of that cap for that. But how much is the defense actually going to change? We know that Nick Sirianni is the head coach. He made the decision. Sean Desai was his guy, hired him over someone that most thought would just get elevated, much like the quarterback coach becoming the offensive coordinator, chose not to go there. How much ability to do what he wants to do will Sean Desai have in place, or is this going to be a carbon copy with just a new guy on the sidelines calling plays for the Eagles this year?
I do not believe it's going to be a carbon copy. Having said that, John will tell you, when you talk to Nick Sirianni, his affinity for Jonathan Gannon is much higher than your average fan. I mean, he really does respect, the numbers, and he would certainly challenge us if we would ever kind of question some things going on with Jonathan Gannon. But it's funny, as the Eagles content producer, you spend a lot of your time, especially this time of year, going out and doing stories that are a little different. And one of them I had a chance to do was with Hassan Reddick, who you guys were mentioning. He hosted his football camp, 400 kids, Camden free, and, just kind of talked to him about this very thing. And I said, he certainly, Sean Desai, when he talked to us, said all the right things. He invoked Eagles defenses. He talked about being uber aggressive and those kinds of things. Behind the scenes, are you seeing it? He's like, oh, yeah, we're seeing it. So I can only give you that because it's hard to tell, obviously, in an OTA what we're actually going to see as it relates to real games. But in talking to players, it feels like that's coming. So I'm of the mind that we will see some more aggressive play, more aggressive style. But I'm also aware of what you said and totally agree with that. Like, to completely just rip it up and start over, that's not happening because they were successful. They reached a Super Bowl more often than not. They had good games. So the bashing of Gannon is, in my opinion, over the top. But I do understand the general fan consensus that against the best quarterbacks, the numbers weren't great. I also look at it and say, well, that's kind of the league. The league is built to be that way. And quite frankly, I think the Eagles know it. I think Jeffrey Lurie said it this offseason. Said you look at our Super Bowls, and in those games, both offenses largely scored every time they had the ball. It's just a matter of getting the stop when it matters. And I think they will be more aggressive, though, this season to try and get those kinds of game-changing plays.
Yeah, it's amazing, Rob. You think about 70 sacks, obviously a franchise. For all the talk about Reggie and Clyde Simmons and, the soft defense is the one that got 70 sacks. The soft defense is the one that got to the Super Bowl. I think people forget that's an accomplishment in itself to get to the Super Bowl. Number 2 overall defense, number 1 against the pass. It's I think there's a disconnect between the thought process of Buddy Ryan, the old school, body bag, versus the modern game, where it's about, as you mentioned, getting the big spot at the big time. The only difference between 52 and 57 is Brandon Graham's strip sack.
That's right.
They were worse on defense, and Jim Swartz will tell you this because he was not happy, as you know, Rob, after Super Bowl 52, giving up 500 yards to Tom Brady. But they made the play. They didn't make the play in 57 against Patrick Mahomes, but the accomplishment is there. Are you surprised that people have kind of skipped over the accomplishment of actually making the Super Bowl?
Yes. and no. So yes, the accomplishment of skipping over the Super Bowl, I am surprised. It almost feels like, well, you didn't win at all. I mean, those of us that have been around the Eagles for a long time, just reaching a Super Bowl and winning an NFC championship is a significant achievement. And especially coming off of 9-8 the year before, didn't beat a team with a winning record, tons of questions coming into the season, not about are they a good team, but are they top caliber team? We weren't certainly saying that as a given entering last training camp. Said it was possible, but certainly not as a given. Now you look at it and you enter this year as the favorite in the NFC because of all that was accomplished and everything you mentioned. Having said that, you also point out the buddy aspect, and you know, you guys have been around it long enough, and the old school Eagle mentality. And there's just, look, they were intimidating, and Philadelphia is always going to gravitate toward that. You come into this town, you better earn it, period. And you earn it on the field, you earn it in your job, you earn it in the way you carry yourself. And Philadelphians respected that. But I remember the real quarterbacks doing the same thing, even to Buddy Ryan. I remember Joe Montana walking into the vet, getting his backside handed to him for 3 quarters, and then standing in there and going, touchdown, touchdown, touchdown. I mean, those things happen. And Philadelphians have a tendency to forget it because they remember all the great times. And I respect that. But I never totally got the bashing of Jonathan Gannon. I mean, I understand that it's exactly as you point out. It's just a different style of defense that gets run across the NFL today.
Yeah.
Rob, let me ask you about quarterbacks, since you mentioned Joe Montana, and I'm not putting him in the same class of Joe Montana, but we did have the runner-up for the MVP here in Philadelphia last year, and Jalen Hurts got paid the way he was supposed to get paid during this offseason. Anybody's around him, anybody who covers him knows that the guy's got his head on straight, and Jeff Lurie called him the most mature 24-year-old he'd ever met in his life, and I think we all concur with that.
Even more than his son, by the way, which is saying something.
Yeah,
even more mature than Julian. So
did pass right over Julian. I wonder what Julian had to say about that.
Yo, Pops,
that'll be a McMullen exclusive. He'll get Julian on the record going. Hey,
Pops is going to get pushed out a little bit earlier. Right?
I don't know about that. Here's my one concern. It's this big about Jalen Hurts this year. There's no diva in him. He's just not that kind of guy. And sometimes when you get acknowledged, when you get paid, that can rear its ugly head. I don't think that's going to be an issue with the Eagles quarterback. However, he's going to get pulled in a lot of different directions this year. When you do achieve what Jalen did, ESPN wants you for a feature, Fox wants you for NFL Network wants you for a feature, your agent's getting you endorsement deals, which means you got to spend time doing commercials and appearances and stuff like that. Is that any legitimate worry coming into this season? Not that Jalen is going to throw up his hands and go, I'm the man, but that because he almost became the man last year, others are going to want his attention and time and everything else. Eagles have any concern for that coming into this year?
So I would say fair concern for almost anybody else, not for him. And just in this regard, my experience has been in trying to do some things, even myself, and it's been exactly that. Listen, he's very focused. He has a very strict schedule, very regimented schedule, very distinct things that he's looking to get done. I've seen him do a couple of things with some energy drinks and everything, but they seem pretty quick. They're in the off season. Everybody that I've talked to, nothing has changed. If not, he's more focused on getting the job done. And it's funny too. I actually thought that, because I remember some other times when guys would say things just in passing, and all of a sudden another player might take it as a slight, right? And Devontae, talked just in passing about, that fumble that he had in the Super Bowl really hurt us. And some guys that we've been around will go, yeah, it's great you point that out. You certainly passed over the 384 total yards and 4 touchdowns. How about that? And instead, he owned it. Said, yeah, you know what? It did. And it can't happen, and it won't happen, and I'm doing everything in my power to make sure that it did. And I believe him when he says it. So I don't discount what you're saying, because I've certainly been around it long enough to see that can happen. I just haven't seen it yet with Jalen.
Yeah, that's a good point, Rob, because a lot of quarterbacks, they would. I mean, he was the best player on the field in Super Bowl 57 and made a big mistake. And,
Yeah.
there are a lot of guys, if one of their players said, hey, that really hurt us, they would have taken it in a negative direction.
Totally.
It's not Jalen's mentality. Nick always talks about his upbringing. They have that in common, coach's son, all that kind of stuff, kind of embraces tough coaching. I think that's an important part of his success. He really doesn't care about constructive criticism, and that's rare. Maybe even a little bit more rare than it used to be in this generation.
Especially in this generation, because and it's just the nature of the world we live in. I mean, look what we're doing now, right? I mean, we're doing shows we couldn't dream of doing 5, 10, 15 years ago. But, the truth is these guys, just like everybody their age, live on social media, and the social media backlash is way more significant in my mind than anything they used to get on sports talk radio or certainly in the newspapers or anything else, because it's incessant. It's always in your face. You can say you're going to try to avoid it. You can't. And so for him to be able to navigate all of that at the age that he is, I honestly think that's why Jeffrey said what he said about his maturity, because it's the ability to handle those things while also galvanizing the locker room. And look, that's a real challenge when you're 23, 24, now going to be 25 years old, and you walk in there, he's a single guy, totally different lifestyle than a 35-year-old like Jason Kelce, couple kids, totally different lifestyle than Brandon Graham. And those guys, and I bring them up because they're the longest tenured offensive and defensive players, all absolutely have ceded the leadership spot, as has to me, the entire locker room, to Jalen. Jalen kind of sets the agenda and everybody falls in line. That doesn't mean that the offensive line don't turn to Jason Kelce. Defensive line don't turn to Brandon Graham. They do. But when you're talking big picture, let's get the guys together right before every game. This is what we're after. These are the expectations. This is, as he says, the standard. That's Jalen.
All right, Rob, this is probably jumping a couple of steps ahead. We got to get through a training camp and then preseason games and practices against other teams before we ever get to the first game of the season. But I want to get to the first game of the season and some roster decisions the Eagles are going to have to make.
Are you skipping the preseason games on NBC 10? How dare you, Jody Mack?
Yeah, season, baby.
Are you going to be broadcasting those joint practices? Because between you, me, and NBC 10, they actually hold more water these days than your preseason broadcast. Yeah. Well, but I apologize in advance for doing that.
I wish, Jody. Trust me.
Understood.
Definitely asking. We'd love to do it.
Here's where my question goes. Last year, Eagle game day, they had 4 running backs on their roster. And Trey Sermon was on the inactive list almost every single. What, he played 2 games last year, John, out of 17?
Yeah, something like that.
Bringing
him up.
Yeah, I feel like the Jags was the game where he actually gave him
the Jags.
First downs in the rain. But you're right.
Right, but and who? I'm sure somebody was hurt that week. Wasn't Boston or Kenny Gainwell might have missed the game. Don't remember which it was. But they kept 4 on the roster, but basically played 3 all year, except for the handful of games that Trey Sermon played in. They have 5 backs in camp, and Trey Sermon's going to have a tough time despite it seeming that the coach truly appreciates Trey's work habits and how good he looks in practice in shorts. He's going to have a tough time making this team. They basically replaced Miles Sanders with 2 guys, DeAndre Swift and Rashad Penny. Are those 2 and add Kenny Gainwell and add Boston Scott, are they just going to keep 3 active on Sundays? Are they going to try and find a way to use all 4 of them? Is one of those guys, and none of them at any point in their career have been guys who are often on the deactivated list. How are they going to shake out that run? I won't even ask how they're going to use them when the season starts, who's going to get what carries and the ball out of the backfield. I just want to know who's up on game day and who's sitting with John McMullen in the press box.
Well, not to avoid the question, but I think what you said off the shoot, it actually does matter. I think training camp settles a lot of that. I think injury could settle a lot of that. I think if you got to that spot where you're through camp, all 4 guys are doing what the back of their baseball card, to borrow a baseball term, says they are, I think there's a world you could see a move. I think there's going to be some interest in, a couple of their backs. And I tend to agree with you. I don't see on a game day them being able to have them all out there. So I think camp sort of determines a lot of that. But if they all make it through, they're all healthy, they're all what you would hope they'd be. Yeah, I would think that they at least at that point start to look at it and you say, okay, as you pointed out earlier, you have concerns about linebacker. Entering camp, I would share them, right? Safety too. So could they come out of camp and say, the linebacker situation didn't settle itself the way we wanted, but a team could really use a Boston Scott and they have a linebacker that we could use? It's not impossible. I mean, we've seen them do that before and make deals with a guy like Ronald Darby, right? Who was a guy that was in a spot where they needed him leading into the Super Bowl season. I could see something like that again. I think the best case scenario for them would be that everybody does play to the back of the baseball card. And then you say, okay, who's in need of a running back? Who's in need of a guy that can give you a little change of pace? And now we have something that you might want.
By the way, 6 backs going to camp, Jody. Kennedy Brooks, the great, the great Kennedy Brooks. Right. So don't want to show Kennedy any disrespect.
PS,
Rob, I wanted to bring up.
PS usually means an addition to something you've already written down. PS means practice squad here. Kennedy Brooks is best chances, unless we're talking 2 big injuries. Kennedy Brooks is going to be on the practice squad at best this year.
That's probably his upside. That's fair to say. I did want to bring up Rob Samaj Beals simply because. So Rob was telling me that we were, as I said, we were at the 7-on-7 tourney that Zach McPherson, Milton Williams hosted in South Jersey. And I saw Rob there, and Rob's telling me, hey, watch this kid in the yellow. And I'm like, all right, whatever. I'll watch this kid. And Alabama's already offered him. And I was just, NFL people for years, Rob, have told me all the innovation in football trickles up. It's like the opposite of most industries. It comes up from college, and even before that, it comes up from high school to college, and then it finally arrives in the pros. I was stunned. Rob has done a lot of high school work over the years for NBC 10, and you guys, broadcast the big games and the highlights and all that kind of stuff. And I was in awe about how advanced these young kids are from these 7-on-7 camps. And then he took the field and it blew my mind. Now he looks like a sophomore. He's got to get bigger. He's got to gain weight, but the arm talent. And I'm like, why is Nick Saban looking at a sophomore? And I watched him for 10 minutes and I go, oh, I get it. You've been doing that kind of stuff for years. How much more advanced have these kids gotten because of these types of tournaments that they do all the time now?
Yeah, significantly. And, we were talking about it, and I used the example of Josh McCown because I talked to him in the locker room when in his last year with the Eagles about it, because his son was a top recruit. And at the time was actually being recruited for a number of schools against a kid that is likely to be the starter at Ohio State, a young man that I was with literally just yesterday, Kyle McCord, who at the time was playing for St. Joe's Prep. And, we were talking about just in the scheme of the NFL today. And I pointed out to Josh, I said, this year, and this was 2019, said Carson Wentz this year is going to finish this year with 35 touchdowns and 7 picks. I looked it up. Only 4 guys in the history of the league have had 35 and 7. So that many touchdown passes, that few interceptions. And, look, the names on the list are Brady, Manning, Aaron Rodgers, and then Wentz. With all due respect, I mean, there's a difference. Even in that season, And I just said, I'm seeing more and more of these numbers. And he said, that starts 7-on-7. What we are running at the high school level and the quality of it and the difficulty of it compared to what it was 10 years ago, 15 years ago, just gets guys more ready. And then certainly they're seeing what we all see, which is a change in the guard of tackling and hitting and leading with the helmet and safety concerns, which limit the defense. And when they do, it makes the offense more lethal. And I think at this level, coaches understand it. And in the Philadelphia level, I think there's another aspect. In our region specifically, I just have not seen the level of talent to the degree that you're seeing it right now. I mean, I'm old enough to remember when Marvin Harrison Sr. was the number one guy, right? And it was him and a guy that I actually went to my high school with. I grew up with, Frank Wycheck. But there weren't many.
Frank Wycheck, yeah.
Frankie Y, my boy.
Yeah.
Dunked on my head circa 1990. That was not a pleasant experience. But yeah, but there weren't a ton of guys from our region going to the NFL, right? Now, there's a world. First of all, Kyle Pitts was just the number 4 pick in the draft.
Yeah.
There's a world in this year's coming draft. Marv is a top 2-3 pick.
Yeah.
Patterson is a top 10
Yeah.
pick. You realize the genes help in those factors, but there is just a lot more talent at the Division I level, high-end Division I level. I remember the draft real quick when the draft came to Philadelphia, getting a call from, at the time, Florida State, the SID. Hey, would you like to have Jimbo Fisher on your show? And I said, well, yeah, of course. Why? I said, well, he's really in on a tight end for Philadelphia, and he'd love to be on camera and make sure he gets seen. You got it. I'd love to talk about all the guys at the top of this draft with a guy that actually played or coached against them. And it was fun, but it speaks to, it used to be the other way. It was always, and we saw it with DeAndre, right? DeAndre gets recruited by the very, very top, and he's a Philly kid. Very top schools, he's going to Georgia. At best, it was always, okay, Penn State, local schools. Now, the top of the top, Alabama, in on a freshman from Roman Catholic. It's different. And that's really a credit to the coaches, but it's also the ability to do these 7-on-7s, be with kids more often. And I just think it's helped. And I think it's a good thing. I really do.
Let me just double check something. You said Trot's kid, top 10 pick?
Yeah.
You think so?
I think top.
I mean, it's early.
First round pick. I think
first round. He's got real ability.
Isn't he a linebacker like his father?
Yeah, that's typical.
Didn't the Lions get ripped to shreds for drafting a linebacker as high as they did this year?
I didn't say the Eagles.
You kidding me? Anybody's going to take a linebacker in the top 10? Are you guys paying attention to what's going on in the National Football League?
Hey, there are guys.
What are you, nuts?
Roquan was a top 10 pick. There are guys.
Roquan's a good couple of years ago now, John.
Devin White was a top 10 pick. Yeah. I don't know. Marvin,
maybe not that high, but look, he is exceedingly highly thought of, and he's just a kid from our backyard. And just the explosion of talent from our backyard is really what I've noticed, certainly in the last 5 to 10 years.
In case you didn't pick on it, I was just pimping you two guys, but I'm actually critiquing the National Football League.
I was actually
because they have so devalued linebackers, it's ridiculous.
By the way, where's Samaj going? Is he going to choose Alabama or Penn State?
Yeah, right. Us, Rob. He's got. I don't know.
He's got like a million offers. So
yeah. Well, I will tell you,
he's going into his junior year, so he's got another year to make up his mind.
Sophomore.
He's going into his sophomore year. And McMullen wants him committing already?
Yes.
Come on, Johnny, cut the kid some slack.
I don't want him
to let him have his first beer first before he
I was amazed.
Play college football.
No, I was amazed at how much interest generated for a freshman quarterback. That's what I was talking about. And then Rob told me, watch the kid in yellow. He's wearing a yellow hat, yellow jersey. And I said, all right, how good could it be? It was pretty stinking good.
Pretty good.
Yeah. So I kind of got it. At R. Kuestner, NBC 10. Make sure you follow Rob on Twitter. Does a tremendous job as the Eagles senior producer
Senior just
Also,
means I'm old, John. That's what that means.
I
You
know.
throw senior
Hey,
on
I'm with you. I'm
yeah.
a senior writer,
Yeah,
senior editor.
We got 3 seniors here,
Yeah.
boys.
Yeah.
3 seniors.
Well, listen, I was going to give Jody Mack a shout out for something, but now that he, ripped me on the Trotter thing, I'm just kidding. A quick story. Circa 1993, young unknown guy doing a radio show at unknown Millersville University. And I call into the listener line at WIP, get the producer on the line, say, is there any shot Jody will call? Not only does Jody call, Jody does a half hour on a show where it was me, him, and maybe my mother listening.
Nice.
God bless Jody Mack.
Yeah, man. All right.
I think I remember that.
There's no way you remember that, but you're a good man for doing it.
But always try and do the right thing by the young guys.
I was thinking about it. Here was the debate. So I was on with 2 of my buddies. One guy's a Maryland guy, and another guy just happened to be a big fan of Joe Smith. We were debating who's going to have the better career, Allen Iverson, Rasheed Wallace, or Joe Smith. I was the Rasheed guy because I'm Philadelphia, and obviously we all lost that to AI, but that's okay.
Yeah, Joe Smith was a hell of a player, though.
He really
stuck around for a long time. He was in the league for a long while.
That's typical competition, though. AI and Rasheed, though. That's
no.
But he was a good player.
He was.
Gonna lose that bet. Rob, we appreciate you jumping in with us. We'll definitely be having you back on.
Yeah, you're in the mix now, Rob.
Well,
you're in deep. You're in deep.
Thanks, guys. I appreciate it.
Our pleasure. Thank you much. Right. That's Rob Kuestner, Eagles senior producer. Senior. When he was just a little high school guy, I was a little older, but not that much older.
That's magnanimous of you, Jody. Get the call from Millersville, doing 30 minutes with Millersville University. I'm impressed.
The megatropolis that is Millersville. I didn't even know where Millersville was. So I said, yeah, fine. You need me? I can give you half an hour. I'm like, that's not a problem. You try and do the right things. By the young guys, great to get Rob in with us today. Did a nice job. We will certainly have him back. Joining us coming up in about 25 minutes is a guy who we've never had on before either. Oh, no, we've had him on a lot. Ed Kratz, Johnny's running buddy from Sports Illustrated, is going to jump in with us. We did not review John and Ed cracked their top 10 yesterday, and we never got around to mentioning who the guys have at number 10. So we've got 10 and 9. We'll hold off on that when Eddie joins us. Ed Kratz, about 25 minutes with us here on Birds 365.